That's a life of a fisherman you wouldn't understand. Something you can't feel on dry land. Gotta get your arms way up in a cage and set the hook on smallmouth bass, and then you'll understand. Gotta get your hands on a Shimano reel and a G-Loom that's trying to bet you like what you feel. Step on the deck, give it the world. Hello, welcome to my world.
What's going on, all you Facebook Live and YouTube Live fishing freaks? Welcome to this episode on Another Line Live. As you guys know, my name is Tyler. JR is non-existent today. He might be working. I haven't really talked to him today. I've been extremely busy. So he has probably forgot that it's Tuesday, which is okay. It is what it is. But again, thank you guys for joining this episode of On Another Line Live. We're going to talk the fall transition period as well as the what happens when a lake turns over. We're going to talk some science, but then, we're going to kind of dive into what you should be throwing this time of year. But again, we're going to be looking at how to target bass during the fall lake turnover series. There is a lot of the stuff that kind of goes in and around to this stuff here going on. And again, this is it's not happening yet, I don't believe, but it won't be too much longer. We're getting closer to getting some of those colder mornings. We're going to be seeing some frost. Hey, Ed, man, thank you. No problem, buddy. No rush. Again, I'm just kind of looking, just to give you an idea, guys. This has nothing to do with the show, but I have 13 tables in my classroom. I'm looking for some lights that shine over them, like in between some monitors, so kids can see their keyboards while I'm teaching. But anyway, no problem, man. No rush. Tony, what's up, buddy? I appreciate those kind words. Best show on the internet. It means a lot. What's up, Dale? How we doing, buddy? Thanks for tuning in. Couple quick things. If you haven't followed the page on Facebook, which again, Facebook is kind of a, I don't know what you would call it. It's a weird place anymore. But I talked last week about how to, about trying to get F1 bass in Vesuvius Lake. And if you guys follow my YouTube page, you probably already know this, but I was all but told no, they're not doing it. No even question that they're going to even think about doing it. The email was, first off, I got an email. So I sent the Wayne National Forest Division office in Athens, Ohio, which is really the top dogs in our area. There is one out on 93, but they're just kind of like, they just do what the people in Athens tell them to do. So I figured I would go to the head of the point here to try, case in point, try to get the people that are in charge to be able to give me the answer to this. So I sent an email basically asking if there was any way that they would consider putting F1 or Florida strain bass in Lake Vesuvius when they filled it up, and why or why not. I got an email basically saying back immediately, well, not immediately, 3 days later from a lady who is their public relations person there. And she said, Tyler, thanks for reaching out. I will dive into this and we'll let you know something, but it doesn't seem like a bad idea. So we'll have to talk to some people that know more about this than I do, but I'll keep you in the loop. So I was very hopeful and I was very, I guess I was optimistic at that point. And then about what seemed like, so I sent an email back explaining all this data that I have found, that Jason Kenner has found, that I've seen in the Anglers for Improving Opportunities Facebook page that everybody posts on there. And done like a pros and cons and a list of things that could potentially help Lake Vesuvius by adding Florida strain or F1 bass in there. Again, we all talked about it 100 different times. Bigger bass, they get bigger, doubly as quick, doubly as big. And I got an email back what seemed like an hour later from the same lady, after I sent an email that was probably, I don't know, it was, a couple thousand words. It was a big email. Just a bunch of, cited source data and all this other stuff. And then I get an email back within the hour that basically tells me that the Florida strainer F1 bass is illegal to possess in Ohio. You can't put them in your private ponds. You can't have them as bait. You can't have them in a fish tank. The email tells me that it is illegal to possess an F1 bass, and they use the word basses, the largemouth and spotted and F1 basses. I could see where they could use that as like different species of bass, but I've never heard of anything called a bass, like plural of bass being basses. So you got to kind of take that into consideration. I have not stopped the fight about trying to improve Lake Vesuvius somehow. Whether that is holding the people's feet to the fire that caused all the destruction out there. I shared the video and the stuff last week showing all of the, the destruction of fish out there. There was catfish, carp. Matter of fact, there's still carp, yes, as of yesterday, flopping in the creek because there's not enough water for them to survive. Which again, carp, they're not looking at a species that's targeted with carp. But I don't know how to, go forward with this because it's so weird to me that they want to protect the northern lineage of bass so daggone much by making the F1 Florida species illegal to possess in Ohio. So they basically told me to go F myself, and they would put what they wanted to in there, and it's going to be northern strain, and they're going to, who knows? They might put muskie in that place. I don't know. But Florida strain bass in Vesuvius is not happening unless I just keep, I'm just going to keep poking and prodding them and see what happens. I mean, let's face it. I can almost guarantee that so what I want to do in the next 5 years after they put new fish back in Lake Vesuvius, I want to go out, catch a couple fish, take them to a biologist and get a DNA test done on these fish to see if they are 100% true northern. And if they are not, then you have a leg to stand on and be like, look, if they're true northerns, that's okay. But they're not true northerns, so why are we holding back the F1 species in this small pond? It seems like a great idea. It's 143 acres. One of her other responses in an email basically was saying that they wouldn't be able to keep up with the forage that would amount that those fish would need to eat, which is crazy. There's money out there. We've talked about that for years. Just like Paintsville, they put like 50,000 threadfin shad in that lake for the last 5 years in a row. So there's money out there to make that happen. But I just, I tried, and I'm still not done trying. But F1s of Vesuvius is not happening. Gary Timberlake, what's up, buddy? Tyler Williams in the house. So anyway, back to the fishing side of things, other than ODNR and Wayne National Forest being who they are, and that's just nobody for the fishermen. But this time of year, no matter if you're in Ohio, West Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, if you get farther like Florida and stuff like this, stuff happens, but it's going to be later in the year. Talking about the fall transition period here in Ohio, we're seeing early morning temperatures in the sometimes 50s, but normally about 60 degrees-ish in the mornings. We're seeing a little bit more wind. The amount of rain that's been in this area is like astronomically low. We went all summer getting like 4 or 5 inches of rain all summer for like 3 months in the summer, which is crazy for here. Super drought. It was really dry. Matter of fact, some of the places in like northern or mid Ohio, talking about like Columbus or even higher than that, like Delaware, I saw some pictures of ground and farmland where they were having like 4-inch gaps of ground that were just breaking open because it was so dry. But in the last week and a half, good old Mother Nature said, we're going to hold everything we had all summer and we're going to give it to you all in 2 weeks. So we got a pile of rain all last week, which is then going to cause the water temperatures to get lower, and it's going to lower the temperatures in lakes and tributaries and things like that. So what we're looking at is not only colder air temperatures, but we're looking at colder water temperatures, which is going to then lead to a lake turnover event. Now, a lake around here always turns over. The river around here always turns over. Now, some lakes may have more dramatic effects of the turnover phase than others. For example, I always go to Grayson and Yatesville during the fall. It's one of my favorite times to fish. But I always feel like that Grayson and Yatesville turn over roughly the same time because we're obviously 10 miles or 20 miles from each other there. I guess it's a little bit farther than that, maybe 40 miles as the crow flies. But fairly the same distance from each other in the same geographic location, so they get the same temperature change. But I feel like Yatesville gets hit harder with the turnover than Grayson does for some reason. I don't know what the deal is with that. I know there's some deeper water in Grayson. Maybe that has the effect. But you can go out to Grayson or Yatesville during the turnover phase of a lake, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Yeah, I agree with that. I haven't responded to their email yet. I want to do a lot more research, and I want to get my ducks in a row because I don't want them to just be able to kick me off wholesale. If I'm going to find this email, and it would just be easier to read the email to you guys about that because I don't want to put any miswords in their mouth. The lady's name is Anna Owens. She is the public affairs officer at the Wayne National Forest Supervisor's Office in Athens, Ohio. She said, "Hi, Tyler. After speaking with our natural resources staff, I learned that Florida bass is on ODNR's Injurious Aquatic Invasive Species, IAIS list. So it's unfortunately unlawful to possess in the state of Ohio. Florida and Alabama basses can hybridize and other closely related, the genus name there, Micropterus, therefore degrading the genetic integrity of the native species in the natural populations. Invasions of these species have led to significant reduction in populations of native black bass in some regions of the United States and reduced the quality of sport fisheries. Preventing the spread of these fish in Ohio waters is essential for securing the genetic integrity of Ohio's native black bass populations and maintaining quality black bass fishing that anglers expect. Red swamp crayfish has moved in from an aquaculture Class B species to an injurious aquatic invasive species list over concerns of the invasive species establishing and outcompeting native crayfish within the state." So that part right there has nothing to do with what I said. So I think that this is probably like a dot phrase type deal where they just automatically, she probably talked to a biologist. The biologist sent this, like, I don't know, random, like it's a regurgitated deal where they just copy and paste it. Because I never said anything about crawfish or crayfish. These new regulations make it illegal to knowingly possess, import, release into the wild, or sell Florida bass, Alabama bass, or their hybrids in Ohio. Red swamp crayfish may still be imported or harvested from the wild or possessed alive for consumption as long as they are killed within 48 hours of receipt or possession. At 143 acres, Lake Vesuvius would also likely require annual stocking of feedstock and Florida bass, both of which the forest cannot have, nor do have the funding or capacity to support, nor maintain. Even if the species was not on the state's IAIS list, Florida bass would likely clean out the existing bluegill population and that of other smaller species as well, which would reduce the opportunities that locals have come to expect. Now, here's where I'm going to call, and excuse me for my French on this, this is where I'm going to call bullshit on this. Eat what bluegill? It's freaking drained. There's like a 2-gallon channel running through this place. Everything that's in that lake is dead. There is no bluegill. There is no perch. There was never any perch. No bluegill, no bass, no catfish, no carp, no shad, no minnows, no crayfish, no catfish. If I already said that, there's nothing left. It is an absolutely decimated area, and she's going to throw that on me. Lightning Inc. Have a strong stocking program. Yeah, so Ed, one of the things that I will say is that that's all I see ODNR stocking is muskie. Maybe you guys have something to do with that. Like I saw on Facebook the other day that their ODNR website or their Facebook was saying that they were stocking muskie in like 15 different lakes in Ohio, which is great. I mean, I think muskie are fun to catch. I don't target them. There's not a whole lot of folks that I know that do target around here, but just like folks like you, you guys probably muskie fish more than you bass fish. So they're to each their own. I like that they're stocking muskie. I just wish they would stock some more bass. $65, $70 to $80 midday. That's about what it's been here. It gets a little early, it gets a little colder in the mornings, but it gets 70 to 80 today. Like right now, it is 69 degrees Fahrenheit here in Southern Ohio. Dennis, I agree with that. It says Lake Vesuvius is embarrassing for Lawrence County. And not only has the fishing out there gotten worse and worse and worse, but what they've done to that thing the last 2 months is just uncalled for, and it's not needed. My biggest thing is they drained the lake supposedly to work on the dam or to work on a valve in the dam, etc. But there's no work being done on it. You would think that they would want to get that thing filled up and get water in there as quick as possible to get rid of all the freaking evidence. There is so many dead fish out there. It is absolutely absurd. They've closed the lake. It's crazy. Really quickly, next weekend coming up, River Rat Bass Tournament. If you're interested in fishing that, again, it is $200. You have to pay in advance. You have to register. You can go to Borders and pick up a registration. You can also go to Malone's Marine in Ironton and pick up registration, or you can get a hold of anybody at the, Dan Mullins, or let's see, who else? Larry Slack, any of these guys from River Valley Bass Club will get you hooked up. But I did see on Facebook today, Dan posted that the cutoff for registration is Thursday evening. You must have your registration and your money paid by Thursday evening, or you will not be able to fish. You cannot pay at the ramp for the River Rat. River Rat's a 2-day tournament, Saturday and Sunday. They pay out like the top 3 places on 2 days, day 1, day 2, big bass for day 1, day 2, and they pay out an overall winner, and it's usually several $1,000s. It's $200 per team, and unless they've changed any of the other rules they did when I was running it, you cannot have substitutions. Whoever you start with, you have to finish with, and you cannot fish alone. You have to have a partner. Yeah, I agree with that. And that's the thing. I put in the email to them that said that we're not asking them, I'm not asking them to fund it. I'm asking them to give us the nod so we can try to work and get it done. Now, I know, just like anything else, guys, that's government funded. It's taxpayer funded. And with politics the way it is, it's, you have to figure out, I know they're not getting a ton of money, but you have to also understand that I looked at some research prior to when I was actually looking and sending these emails to this lady, that there is an absurd amount of, like, I think I was looking, I'll just read it. It's a lot of, there's a lot of licenses sold in DNR, they're ODNR, so Ohio. So 2023 to 2024, so last year licenses, ODNR reports 727,887 total fishing licenses sold of all types. Now, some of those could have been trout stamps, some of them could have been, private lakes, some of them could have been all kind of different things. But if we just do some basic math here, and we just figure that, if we conservatively assume that the fishing license revenue is perhaps maybe half to 2/3 of that amount of money, and the total user fee, if you will, you have to think about that half of that being, if you look at 727 1,000-ish licenses at an average price of whatever they are, like $18 or whatever, you're looking at $74.5 million. Which, if you think about half of that, that's $37.25 million bucks of taxpayer money. Not taxpayer money. I mean, it is at that point, but it's revenue because we're spending the money to buy the license. Now, if you think about 2/3 of that amount of money, $74.5 million, 2/3 of that would be $49.7 million, and those are on low sides. Now, if you think about that, so that's we're looking at $50 million roughly. Now, I posted that online and was asking for a little bit of debate, and somebody came at me and was like, you got to think about the wildlife officers and their pay, their salary. And I get that 100%. But we're only talking about fishing license here. So we're talking about $50 million in fishing licenses. We're not talking about hunting license. We're not talking about deer tags. We're not talking about turkey tags. We're not talking about boar tags. We're not talking about whatever. We're talking about fishing in general on the low side of 2/3 of the revenue going in, and that's $50 million. Now, that's probably, rough estimate. Again, that's not, if it's online, it's got to be true, right? But that money there, I don't know what they do with the money. And again, I know that, like Ed, what you're talking about, you guys are helping getting muskie stock, but you're also telling me that you guys are basically footing that bill yourself or finding ways to get it done. Which is, again, is crazy to me. Like, why? If we look at the Vesuvius thing, if you went out there, and this is a true story because I know the fellow that done it, about a month before Vesuvius was drained, I had a buddy of mine go out to Vesuvius and he took his son out there. This guy is not a fisherman. Well, he's not a fisherman like you and I. He doesn't live of fishing, but he does fish. But he took his son out to Vesuvius and was fishing with his son. He didn't have a fishing rod in his hand. His son had the fishing rod. They had a tackle box there. They had some live bait and stuff. His son was fishing. The guy that I'm talking about wasn't casting the guy's line. He wasn't casting the kid's line. He wasn't helping him reel it in. The kid's 7 to 10 years old, so he was doing it all himself. And then he got hounded by the game warden out there about telling him that he needed a fishing license to have his son fish there. Now, whatever. I'm not knocking Darren Abbott or whoever it was that stopped him because he's just doing his job. I get it. I'm not knocking him. I know that he has one of the hardest jobs on the planet. But fast forward 2 months, and they killed thousands, if not millions, of fish in that one thing. But if you would have caught one bass or one bluegill over the limit, or if he'd have got caught fishing without a license, there's my problem. There's where I have an issue. Yeah, man, that's I hate that because that's normally where it goes. With everything, it seems like there's always somehow whatever happens, somehow it gets misplaced or misappropriated. That's not a bad idea. Bass fishermen pay an extra $10 for that stamp, and then all of that goes back. I would be 100% with that. My license a year in Ohio as a resident, same with you, is $19 a year, I think. Unless this went up, maybe it's $24, but it's less than $25. I pay $50 to $100 a year in other states because I am, I'm a non-resident. They're always more expensive. But if it meant me guaranteeing that half of my money went to stocking fish in lakes in Ohio, it wouldn't even have to be lakes that I fish. I don't want them to do like Lake Erie because there's this, it's a giant lake. There's tons of bass and fish in there. But lakes that I can go to and fish, I would be willing to pay upwards of $50 for a fishing license. Now, that then goes into a situation where you have folks that are on a fixed income and people that are on Social Security or they're disabled and stuff. I get that. Like, I don't want, the whole goal is to get out there and do some fishing. And I think $24 or whatever it is a great price for a fishing license, especially today. But there is a little bit of room for improvement. And I like the way you're thinking there, Lightning. And it's just, that's why we're, I think it's going to take anglers like us here kind of driving the conversation with the DNR folks. Because I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I don't know that they do any kind of research based on what makes everything better in a lake, other than the fact that they don't want to put anything in there that's invasive, and they want it to only be in a native species. And they'll dump some bass in Vesuvius or another lake, and then they'll dump some shad or something in there, and then they'll stock trout every year like they have for the last 20 years, and they'll just call it a day. But it may be because they're ignorant to how it needs to be done. And I think that's a great way. And I asked the Anna lady if she would be willing to come on the podcast, or if she knew somebody at the Division of Wild or at Wayne National Forest that would like to come on and have a conversation with me. And I did say, look, I'm not trying to attack you here. We're just trying to get some information. I have a small following. We're trying to get some information about what's the best thing to do to try to make the fishing better around here. And she politely declined, and she said that there was no one available. So, they probably get asked a lot. I'm not sure if they do or not. But with that being said, yeah, man, I like the way you're thinking. Again, I have no problem spending extra money. I'm not rich by any means. I'm a high school teacher. You guys should know that. But again, that kind of comes into the situation where, those fixed incomes folks and the people that are older. And I know if you're like over 65 or something, you get free fishing license anyway, which is the way it should be. But, there is some options. There are some things there. And another thing about the paying for it thing, I told her in the email that, again, that we had several options to paying for the fish every year should it need to be restocked. That would be grant funded. That would be local partners, local donations, etc. She wasn't hearing that. And again, I think that email that I was sent was basically a copy and paste regurgitation of they're tired of sending it. So they see that red crayfish and all that stuff in there. That's why it tells me that wasn't directed directly at me. Yeah, Ben. That's another thing, man. Government shut down supposedly tonight at midnight. And I don't know. First off, I am not versed anyway in politics. I vote what I believe. I vote who the folks that I think that are going to do the best job for me and those around the United States. With that being said, where does, my thing is that the government works for us. They also, during stuff like this, they can't agree. The right can't agree with the left. Conservatives can't, agree with the liberals or everything in between there. There is a budget proposal going on. They cannot come up with a middle ground. So they're just basically saying, you know what? I'm going to take my ball and I'm going home. We're just going to shut down the government. I'll tell you one thing, and this has nothing to do with fishing and nothing to do with politics. Put those jokers on minimum wage and see how fast stuff gets changed out. If they're making $350,000 to $500,000 a year to go to, some really ritzy place in Washington, D.C. and sip tea and eat crumpets with people, I wouldn't want to do anything either. I wouldn't want to do anything to tip over the apple cart. And that's kind of where we're at. But I don't know what's going to come. I did see that they were talking about making prescriptions cheaper for people today. So I'm all for that. It's great. Back to fishing. Again, lake turning over. Got off for a rant on Lake Vesuvius. I apologize for that. But again, I'm not quitting the good fight here. We're going to go out and try to see what we can do. I'm just going to keep knocking on the door until they eventually tell me to leave, or they're going to arrest me. I'm not going to harass them, but that's the deal. Yep, I agree with that, Tony. It's a wild world, man. But anyway, so let's think about lake turnover, what it actually is. Let's think about plain English first, and then let's dive into the science. And I think the science is going to allow us to become better fishermen, to be honest with you. So in plain English, basically what this means is when the lake turns over, the layers of the water form during the summer stratification season, if you will. Stratification just means that it's layered, right? Kind of like a black and tan beer, if you will, something that, oil and water, it doesn't mix. However, we're talking about temperatures of water here. And we're also talking about oxygenation and the amount of oxygen that's in those areas. Now, so again, when a lake turns over, the layers of water that's formed on the summer on the top mix from the top to the bottom. That's exactly why it's called lake turning over, because the water that's on the bottom comes to the top, water that's on top goes to the bottom, and that's due to temperature change. It's also done usually in the fall, especially in my area, with some high winds causing the physical mixing of the lake. Now, what that does is that it allows the oxygen-rich water that is normally in that thermocline area, usually about mid-stratification layer of the water, depending on how deep it is. Could be 15 foot, it could be 75 foot. If you're talking about Dale Hollow versus Yatesville or Grayson, it could be extremely deep, could be very, very shallow, just depending on how deep the water is. So what happens is the lower water column usually has that really dense, nutrient-packed area of water. It's a volume of water. And when that thing turns over, it also gets mixed in the whole entire lake. So we don't have that distinct stratification of the lake anymore. All of the oxygen is dispersed all among all water columns and all areas of the lake. Now, when you think about that, that is very easy to understand why fishing the fall period during the lake turnover phase can be very tough when you think about that. And we'll dive into what I'm talking about there in just a second. So again, summer stratification phase, where you have warm, sunlit water that sits on top of there, right? And then you have cooler, more dense water that sits below that. And between them is a very sharp temperature gradient. And that's what's known as the thermocline. Now, that thermocline, where the really hot water and the really cool, dense water meets, again, is where most of the oxygen resides within the lake during the summer stratification phase. Now, when you think about that, most of the organic matter that's in the lake decomposes and falls to the bottom of the lake. Dead minnows, bird excrement, like frogs, stuff that die. They usually sink to the bottom. They're going to begin to decompose on the bottom in that deeper water. Usually, what that really causes is something I've really dug into, and it really makes sense to me, is that decomposition phase of that dead organic material, whether that be dead fish or dead animals or mammals or whatever, that decomposition phase requires oxygen to actually happen. This is why you see things that are frozen not decomposing. They're not getting access to the air. It's required to have air to decompose things. You're going to have also some organic things eating other things, basically back to the earth from which it came. So that is another reason that those really deep water haunts that these fish are in a lot of times doesn't have a lot of oxygen in the summertime. That's why if you're going out cranking in 30 to 50 foot of water, you may not have the greatest luck. Normally in the summertime, when you're dropping that jig down there in 30 to 50 foot of water, you're going to have a lot better luck than you would throwing a big, giant, deep diving crankbait, depending on where you're fishing, obviously. So, back to the science of, back to the real world English, plain English of this. So again, the triggers for the turnover is the fall, the surface water cools, becomes more dense, and then sinks. Now, again, it's just like anything else. Heat rises, cool air sinks or stays lower. It's the same process when it comes to hot and cold water. So you have hot water at the top, cold water, cooler water at the bottom, and then they become, equally as dense, and you have the warmer water that will eventually fall into the cooler water areas, causing that shift and that lake turnover effect. Now, when that happens, wind, again, as I mentioned, helps that process along by physically stirring the lake. Eventually, the temperature will even out and vertical mixing of the water, and that happens at that point. The lake becomes nearly the same temperature from the top to the bottom. that is also known as isothermal, meaning that whatever the temperature is within the first foot of the water, it is roughly what it is at the first or the bottom 1 foot of water because of that transition phase. And if you think about that, that's what dissipates the oxygen-rich water in the lake. And again, we'll get to that in just a second, but this is why I think that you have such a hard time, including myself, catching fish during the turnover phase. You always hear, when the lake is turning over, fishing is terrible. And I think there's some science behind this that will help you understand, because it did help me understand it. And I have to understand why this happens so I can become a better angler. So if we look at chemical and biological consequences, what happens when this lake turns over in layman's terms? Well, deep water nutrients, something like phosphorus, ammonia, etc. You could also see carbon dioxide, obviously, from these decomposing fish and animals and things that are in the bottom of the lake. And maybe in certain aspects, in some very extreme cases, you could see something like hydrogen sulfide become prevalent in the water. Again, not good. That's where you get that rotting sewer smell from that hydrogen sulfide, as well as the nutrient-rich bottom stratification layer coming up. You're smelling those organics that are actually decomposing. You know, not all lakes turn over the same way, but it's pretty easy to find them and which one do. And again, if you think about deep, clear lakes, they actually show a really strong turnover. So if you get on a Del Hollow when the lake's turning over, you will see stuff that, I mean, it turns super muddy, super murky. It looks almost like tannin, it's like brackish. It looks almost like brackish water. Like if you've ever been inshore fishing down in the Gulf, like down in Florida or somewhere, you see that really like reddish brown color. That's because of the mixing of that. I'll tell you, how does it affect the river? Basically the same, man. It just depends on how much water is being moved at any given time. For example, if we look at something like the Ohio River is near and dear to my heart. It's 5 minutes for me. I can almost throw a rock and hit it. So how does it affect my river? Maybe different than something down in North Carolina, but here's how I can tell you that it affects the Ohio River. It all depends on how much water has been flowing in that river at any given time for that summer. For example, we've had 0 rain here up until the last 2 weeks. We've had about, 5 or 6 inches of rain in the last week or so. So we've got almost the same amount of rain in 2 weeks as we had for 2 months of the summer. So the lack of water flow in my area has caused, or lack of precipitation, I'll say, it's caused my pool of the river to be pretty stagnant. And what I mean stagnant is they have to have, the reason the dams are created in the lakes or in the rivers is for flood control, for one, but it also allows for the amount of water to be standardized or regulated in between those dams. So you know how much water is there. You can release the dam to release some of the water, again, for flood control. So if you get 10 inches of rain in one spot and it's only in one pool of water, you can release some of it in the next spot, etc. This year, we haven't had a whole lot of rain. So the only water that's being moved through the dam right now, especially the Greenup Dam, is roughly what's being moved through the dam when they actually lock barges and bigger boats through. Now, this year for the turnover on the river, it is going to be more drastic than it would be if there was more water flowing through it, in my opinion. Again, take that for what it's worth. I'm not a wildlife biologist, and I'm not a hydraulic expert either. But I do see that when there's less water flow through the summer, that the turnover happens more drastically. And I think that's the reason, is because it has more time for those biologic, those organic substrates and those organic things to sink to the bottom of the river and create this, really stratified layer of really rich organic, less oxygenated water. When it comes up, you're going to see a huge change in the water clarity. It's going to go from pretty clear, what it is now, to murky, probably less than 2 foot of visibility. But one thing I will tell you is that normally when there's less water flow in the river, in my opinion, from what I understand and what I see on a year-to-year basis, the turnover usually happens a little quicker, usually within a week. Now, if there's a lot of water flowing through there, it potentially could turn over several times. It just depends on how much water is coming in and all of that. It's all temperature related. But basically, a lake and a river is going to be the same for the turnover, but it's going to be looking at the dispersion of oxygen, which we'll talk about in just a second. Yeah, 100%. Dead leaf suspended, water looks stained, chances it's in turnover. Do the best in very shallow water. Same. There's always that thing in the turnover series, or turnover phase of the lake. Normally, that's when the leaves are falling usually too. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. You go up there and start throwing a crankbait in that 1 to 3 foot of water, you could probably catch fish, but also there's all kind of new leaves falling on top of the water, which means you got to be very selective of where you cast. Hey, Mom, what's up? Hope you have a great evening. Yes, sir. That's one of the biggest telltales. If you look at water and it looks weird, no other way to explain it other than you fish a lake body often and you go there and it just looks different. It looks off. Could be looking at turnover phase. So this is what I was talking about why I think understanding how oxygen is dispersed in the water is detrimental, or it's imperative for you to understand how to catch more fish. So let's think about this. Summer, it's stratified. One or multiple layers. Right in the center, you're going to have what's known as the thermocline, which is where that's a really steep or really sharp gradation of the warm water to the cooler water, similar to, it's not exactly like it, but if it helps me put it in my mind, is like oil and water, where you can see that distinct line underneath there. Well, let's just say that oil and water could mix. They can actually become one and mix at this point in this scenario. When it mixes all over the place, all of the stuff that's in both of those layers are scattered out everywhere, including the oxygen. And oxygen changes matter. They matter in all forms of bass fishing and all forms of fishing. And it just understands. It really helpful for me to understand why it's tough to catch fish in the turnover phase. And I think this is why. Because if you think about it in the summertime, eventually it gets to the stratification phase where you have warmer water on top, cooler water below that, thermocline in the center, and fish can get used to that. All of, or most of, the oxygen-rich water is going to be around that thermocline. Again, that really steep gradation period gradation layer from the warm to the cold water. That's where a lot of the oxygen is. And I'm just going to throw out a statistic here because 80% of all statistics are made up. Ask me how I know. Let's just say that 80% of the air is in that thermocline layer. Again, we're just throwing out numbers here. I don't know the exact numbers, but let's say 80%. 80% of the oxygen in that whole entire lake could be within 3 foot of the water column. So you're going to have these fish that are going to find their way to be roughly in that water column. Again, more oxygen, which means you're going to have oxygen there. You're going to have plankton there, which is going to bring the bait fish there. Bait fish is then going to bring the bigger fish in. Again, it's a circle of life here. Now, when you think about the turnover phase, this oxygen that is normally in a really thin layer in that thermocline gets mixed up everywhere in the water column of the lake. So these fish now are scattered everywhere. So why is it tough to catch fish when the lake's turning over? It's because these fish can literally be from 1 foot to 100 feet, or however deep your lake is, because the oxygen is everywhere in the lake. So it makes sense for me to understand that. Okay, why is it hard to catch fish in the lake during turnover? Because they're not easily patterned. They're everywhere. They're chasing bait fish who are chasing plankton and other things in the water. And these things have practically the entire lake, top to bottom, to roam around on. So This is why I think it's going to be very imperative for you to understand what I am now coming to understand and trying to learn, is that in the fall, just as Lightning said, throw something that allows you to cover a lot of water. Crankbaits, lipless crankbaits, rattle traps, something like that. You can throw a deep diving crankbait if you want. You can throw a jig. The greatest thing about fall and spring fishing is like there's really no wrong bait to use, especially in the fall during the turnover, because again, these fish could be anywhere. Now, the hardest part about that is that they're going to be really tough to pattern because again, they literally can be anywhere. I know I've said that 50 times already, but these fish are going to just, it's like throwing a bomb in there and they just blow up in the lake somewhere and you just got to go find them. It becomes not a fishing contest. It comes into a even more of a a scavenger hunt, if you will. We're going out there and finding those green Easter eggs every weekend, which is crazy. And then you go try to find those green Easter eggs in a green field of all oxygenated water. So it becomes tough to catch them. Hey, Dale, what's up, buddy? Let's see. Cumberland River. So you could be right. There may not be. There's probably water out there that doesn't turn over, especially with, if you're getting a lot of barge traffic and stuff like that. Does make sense to me. Yeah, it's pretty crazy, man. Like I said, it's definitely happening in lakes. Some rivers, you're probably exactly right. Probably not turning over at all. Or it's constantly turning over because of barge traffic and you have water and you're moving a lot of current, etc. So it doesn't affect it really as much as you would think a lake. Probably 100% true. Now, again, not only does the oxygen change and those oxygen, make a difference, but the food web shifts as well. So we think about the food web as basically the circle of life. You have small phytoplanktons and planktons and stuff that, like shad and threadfin and bighead minnows and all these other bait fish, bluegill and things, and they're feeding on these things. But the food web could shift a little bit due to the fact that during this transition period, the nutrients that are setting on the bottom of the lake, when it kind of disperses into the water column, these things are going to, again, it's going to have plankton in it. It's going to have insects in it. Something like you may see a second hatch of mayflies. You may see some nymphs or midges. There's going to be some fall types of insect production. It could be even as something like mosquitoes and things like that. They're going to be larvae in the water, and these smaller things that are in the water, these living organisms, are what the bait fish are feeding on. Again, which we all know that when you're talking about fish, they have to eat something. Usually bait fish. Where's the bait fish go? Well, they're looking for something to eat too. So the food web is going to change and shift a little bit just for the simple fact that there's going to be water and oxygen all over the lake, and it's going to disperse that nutrient stuff as well. One of the other things is that the feeding behavior in this area for bass or during this feeding thing can be very irregular. Just for the simple thing that if you think about this, they are used to one certain thing. They're used to being in whatever 15 foot of water, wherever that thermocline is, and they're used to doing their thing, traveling back and forth, eating bait fish that they may get the opportunity to eat, traveling down lower, going down to the bottom, looking for things like crawfish or things like hellgrammites or something like that they may have the opportunity to eat. Well, now it all changes pretty suddenly. It's within a couple days. It goes from being extremely stratified to not so stratified at all. So it kind of, I think, in my opinion, again, I'm not a wildlife biologist here, I feel like it gives them kind of a shock factor. They're like, whoa, what is happening here? My oxygen here in this water column is kind of dispersing, and I can go anywhere in this lake and I can find the exact same amount of oxygen that I had all summer. So it kind of, in my opinion, gives them a little culture shock, and they have to kind of think, they have to get back into a routine. In my opinion, I think bass are routine creatures, and they have to have certain normalcies to make them feel like eating. Again, just my opinion. So where should we be fishing? during the fall transition into the turnover phase. Well, here's some just quick tips that I wrote down over the last couple hours thinking about this show this evening. Again, my advice is to cover water quickly. Throw some reaction baits, rattling lures, something to expose those aggressive fish that may be in and around the water that you are targeting. Again, it's really tough to pattern fish during the turnover because they could be anywhere. Try multiple depths. Fish from the surface to the deep water. And I know that sounds nonsensical. Like, of course, Waller, top to bottom, right? We're going to find them somewhere. It sounds nonsensical. I get it. But if you're throwing a jerk bait like a Shimano Zoom Verno that goes 4 to 6 feet and you're not getting bit in the first hour of throwing it, it's probably because those bass are not in that zone. Might want to pick up a little deeper diving crankbait. Maybe you're going to throw a DT10 or DT12, something like that. Get down a little deeper. If you're not getting bit there, you might go a little deeper. You might throw a topwater bait. Maybe you missed them in that jerk bait. Maybe they're from 4 to 0 foot of water. You just have to keep trying baits until you find where they're at. And again, that's kind of weird because they may not be. If you catch a fish in 4 foot of water, that may not mean that you can go anywhere else in the lake and catch a fish in 4 foot of water because they're just so scattered out. Oh, yeah, there's a bait, man. The swim jig. That's awesome. I love a swim jig myself. I'm just getting into them. Pretty crazy that I'm just now getting into them. But I have a couple do-it molds that I poured up. Man, I bet I have 100 swim jigs in my garage that are sitting there in a box that I haven't done anything with. They're fixing to come out. White and chartreuse, something like that. Again, cover a lot of water. Some of the best baits, again, lipless crankbaits, fast retrieves, medium deep diving crankbaits, jerk baits, Shimano Zoom Vernos coming back out of my box very soon, probably this week. 4 to 6 inch swim baits. You always, I will never go fishing in the fall without a spinnerbait. And I'm not one of those purists that says you have to throw a spinnerbait when it's cloudy or you have some chop in the water. I'm not that guy. I will throw a spinnerbait in a slick, calm day, depending on what the water looks like. If the water has a little bit of murk to it, I'll throw it if it's bluebird skies. I rarely will throw one if it's bluebird skies and like 10 foot of visibility, unless I'm a Lake St. Clair and notice to eat anything. If you have the ability to use something like a fish finder or something like a Humminbird Solix or a Lowrance HDS12 or something even smaller than that, something that has really good side and down imaging, look for flocks of bait fish, if you will. We're looking for big balls of shad, big balls of baits, big head minnows, what have you, whatever's in your lake. Alewives, find those things. Again, fish are going to be chasing after those. Well, these bait fish are probably going to be looking at somewhere else in the lake than they have been all summer because all the phytoplankton and the plankton and the insects and all this stuff are going to be dispersed in the water column all over the place. Yeah, man, I'll have to check them out. But those are my 3 favorite right there. Actually, bluegill collar. I don't ever throw a black and blue. I'll have to check that one out. I throw white and chartreuse and white. I don't throw, I guess, clear. I guess I would throw that. But I just threw strictly white, bluegill, and white and chartreuse. Those are my favorites. But I'm a beginner throwing a swim jig. A couple specific tactical points here before we hop off here. We're at that 1 hour mark. Wind matters. Find some wind-blown points. Look at flats that basically concentrate or congregate bait and oxygenate the surface. Those are good places to start. What are some of the structure you should hit? Well, look for creek edges. Look for really steep banks, creek channels, points, humps, submerged timber, rock piles. They basically, a lot of times bass will often stage at the edges of those places where they think bait is going to be congregating or creating concentrations. Yeah, buddy. That's what I'm talking about. Dude, Lake Master is awesome. It's also a racket, $200 a card, and you got to have a card for every state you fish practically. Sweet, man. I'll have to do that. I'll check it out. Dude, Dale, some of my favorite skirts on the planet right now are Z-Man. I love the Z-Man with what they call tails on them. They're just longer, a midsection of it. Holy crap, they're awesome on a spinnerbait. I bet they would be awesome on a swim jig too. And there's really no like set retrieve speeds, guys. Again, this is a tough area to fish, tough time to fish. Just cover a lot of water. Throw your favorite bait. Throw something that you have some confidence in. Throw a 4-inch Keitech Easy Shiner in chartreuse shad. I promise you, you will catch a fish if there's fish to be had. Depending on what depth you're using, use the head that you like the best. I like Berkley Fusion 19 heads. I like Picasso Smartmouth jig heads for swim baits as well. I like the Smartmouth Plus that has a weed guard, which is really awesome from Picasso. But again, if you're looking to be put on an absolute fish catching swim bait, look at a 4-inch Keitech Easy Shiner in chartreuse shad. Just stay away from my area buying them because I never can find them. Dude, Fred, I am jealous as all get out, man. East and West Harbor, that is awesome. I hope you go up there and absolutely whack them. Lake Erie is a place to do it. With that being said, guys, thanks for sticking around for this episode of On Another Line Live. Talking about the fall transition period as well as the turnover of a lake. Hope you guys learned something tonight. Appreciate you guys sticking around listening to me blab for the last hour. And I appreciate the support, guys. It means a whole lot. You guys could be spending your Tuesday evenings doing anything else. I appreciate you guys coming and hanging out with us. So until next time, you guys know what to do. Get out there and lean on them. We'll see you next time on Another Line.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of On Another Line Live. We truly appreciate your support, and we couldn't do it without all the amazing folks at home watching week after week. A big thank you goes out to our sponsors, who help make this show possible. Malone's Marine, Borders Sporting Goods, Solar Bat Sunglasses, Picasso Lures, Shimano, and Columbia Sportswear. Their partnership allows us to keep bringing you the content you love. We'll see you next time on Another Line. Until then, get out there and lean on them.